No one understood why she built a barn around the house until the cold arrived. Margaret Foster had become the talk of the small town of Highland Ridge. Neighbours pointed to her property with curiosity, and some even with mockery, unable to understand the strange structure she had been building over the last few months. It was in early March that she began constructing that peculiar framework. While everyone was preparing for autumn, Margaret worked tirelessly to raise wooden walls around her simple house, creating a kind of cocoon that left only small openings for the windows. The locals couldn't comprehend what she intended with it. Ever since her husband Thomas had passed 2 years before, a victim of a sudden heart attack during the harvest, Margaret had become an even more reserved woman. She had always been quiet, but now she seemed to carry a weight that no one could decipher. Her brown hair, once always neatly styled, was now tied up any which way, and her calloused hands worked without rest on that mysterious construction. Mrs. Dorothy, her closest neighbour, watched from her kitchen window as Margaret carried heavy planks alone. The 68-year-old woman shook her head, worried about the widow's mental state. She had tried to talk to her a few times, but Margaret always changed the subject or said everything was fine. Margaret's son, James, had called the previous week. He lived in Denver with his family and rarely visited his mother. During the call, she had tried to explain about the construction, but he was in a hurry and didn't pay much attention. He only said he thought it was strange for her to spend money on unnecessary renovations. On that April morning, the sky was heavy with dark clouds. Margaret woke up early, as she always did, and put the kettle on the fire to prepare her yerba mate. While the water heated, she looked out the window and saw Mr. Walter, the mailman, approaching her property. The 70-year-old man walked slowly down the dirt road, carrying his mailbag. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret," he greeted, approaching the gate. "How's that construction going?" "Good morning, Mr. Walter," she replied, coming out of the house to get the mail. "It's coming along. Just a few more weeks and I'll finish." "You don't mind me asking what you intend to do with all this?" inquired the mailman, curious. "Folks in town have been talking." Margaret took the letters from his hands and sighed. She knew it would be hard to explain, without them thinking she was losing her mind. "It's protection, Mr. Walter. Protection that will be necessary." "Protection from what, Mrs. Margaret?" "From the cold that's coming," she replied, looking at the sky. "A cold like I've never seen around these parts." Mr. Walter scratched his head, confused. He knew winters in the ridge were harsh, but nothing that justified such a strange construction. "But you've always spent winters here without a problem," he commented. "This one will be different," said Margaret, with a certainty in her voice that left the mailman unsettled. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. After Mr. Walter left, Margaret opened the letters. One was the electric bill, another from the bank, and the third was from a company she didn't recognize. Opening the envelope, she found a purchase offer for her property. The amount offered was well above what she imagined the land was worth. The letter was signed by a certain Dr. Richard Henderson, representing a company called Green Mountain Development Corporation. They were interested in acquiring several properties in the area for a tourism expansion project. Margaret folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. It wasn't the first time she had received such an offer, but this time the amount was tempting. That afternoon, as she continued working on the wooden structure, Margaret thought about her conversation with the mail carrier. She knew people didn't understand what she was doing, but she also knew she couldn't explain the truth. At least not yet. What she had discovered a few weeks ago had completely changed her perspective on the near future. It all started when she found the papers her husband had left in a box in the attic. Thomas was a retired meteorologist and had always been a very observant man. In his final years, he had been noting subtle changes in the region's climate, comparing them with historical data and making projections. What Margaret discovered in those notes terrified her. According to Thomas's calculations, the region would be hit by the most severe winter in the last 100 years. The notes indicated a confluence of climatic factors that would result in extremely low temperatures, abundant snow, and devastating winds. But the most concerning part was the prediction that the cold would arrive earlier than normal and last much longer. Margaret tried contacting some experts to confirm her husband's theories, but most paid no attention to the notes of a retired meteorologist. A university professor even laughed when she called, saying there was no evidence of such drastic climate changes for the region. But Margaret knew her husband. Thomas was meticulous and never made claims without being certain. If he had predicted a severe winter, then it was better to prepare. That's how she decided to build the protection around the house. The structure she was raising wasn't just a whim. Every board had been calculated to create an insulating layer around the main house. Between the house walls and the new structure, she was creating a space that would serve as a buffer against the extreme cold. Furthermore, she had planned to install an improvised heating system using firewood and heated stones. The following week, Margaret received an unexpected visit. Dr. Richard Henderson, the man from the letter, appeared on her property driving a luxurious pickup truck. He was a middle-aged man, well-dressed with graying hair and a smile that didn't inspire confidence. "Mrs. Margaret Foster?" he asked, stepping out of the vehicle. "Yes, that's me," she replied, interrupting her work. "My name is Richard Henderson. I believe you received my letter." "I did, yes, but I'm not interested in selling." "You haven't even heard my full proposal," he insisted, moving closer. "I can increase the offer." "It's not a matter of money, Doctor. This land has been in my family for generations." Richard looked around, observing the strange construction Margaret had been raising. "May I ask what you're doing here?" he questioned with curiosity. "Home improvements," she replied, without going into detail. "It looks like an interesting construction," he commented. "Did you hire an engineer?" "It wasn't necessary." Richard took a few steps around the property, examining the structure. Margaret noticed he seemed more interested in the construction than in actually making a deal. "You know other properties in the area have already been sold to us, right?" he said, changing the subject. "We're developing a major project here." "What kind of project?" asked Margaret. "Winter tourism. We're going to build a modern ski resort with hotels and chalets. This region has the potential to become the premier winter destination in the southern United States." Margaret found the coincidence strange. Just when she was preparing for a severe winter, someone appeared interested in developing winter tourism in the region. "Do you have climate information that justifies this investment?" she asked. "We have studies indicating this region will have increasingly severe winters in the coming years," replied Richard. "It's a unique business opportunity." That answer confirmed Margaret's suspicions. If a company was investing millions based on the forecast of harsh winters, then Thomas's notes were probably correct. "Even so, I'm not interested in selling," she reaffirmed. "Are you sure, ma'am? I can offer double the amount of the first proposal." "Yes, I am. And now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my work." Richard didn't insist further, but before leaving, he handed a business card to Margaret. "If you change your mind, just call. My offer still stands." After he left, Margaret kept thinking about the conversation. There was something strange about that man and his company. Why such a specific interest in buying properties in that region? And why did he seem so interested in the construction she was doing? That night, Margaret called James in Denver. She wanted to tell him about the visit and her concerns about the winter. "Mom, you're exaggerating," said James. "Harsh winters have always happened in the ridge. You've always managed just fine. James, your father did detailed studies. This winter will be different." "Mom, Dad died 2 years ago. Those notes of his might be outdated." "He predicted this before he passed, son. He knew it would happen. You're wasting money on this construction. If you want to move to the city, you can come live with us." "I don't want to move. I want to stay here, but I need to prepare." "All right, Mom, do as you wish, but don't spend all your money on this." Margaret hung up the phone, frustrated. No one seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation, but she would continue preparing, with or without her family's support. In the following weeks, Margaret intensified the work. Besides the external structure, she began stocking up on provisions, firewood, and other essential supplies. She bought extra blankets, candles, lanterns, and even a small gasoline generator. Mrs. Dorothy, who watched everything from her window, grew increasingly worried about her neighbor's behavior. One afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy decided to go to Margaret's property to have a frank conversation. "Margaret, dear, may I come in?" she called from the gate. "Of course, Mrs. Dorothy. Please come in. I'm worried about you, dear. Ever since Thomas passed, you've changed so much." "I'm fine, Mrs. Dorothy." "Fine, nothing. Just look at this strange construction. What is all this for?" Margaret sighed. Mrs. Dorothy was a good person and deserved an explanation, even if a partial one. "It's protection against the cold, Mrs. Dorothy. This winter will be very severe." "More severe than the others?" "Margaret, dear, you're creating problems where there aren't any." "Thomas did studies, Mrs. Dorothy. He predicted all of this." "Thomas was a good man, but he's not here anymore. You can't live based on old notes." "They're not old notes. They're accurate predictions." Mrs. Dorothy looked around, seeing the piles of firewood, the stacks of provisions, and the peculiar structure Margaret had built. "Dear, you need help. Maybe it's best to talk to someone." "I don't need psychological help, Mrs. Dorothy. I need to prepare for what's coming." "And what if you're wrong? What if this winter is normal like all the others? Then I will have lost a few weeks of work and a little money. But if I'm right and don't prepare, I could lose much more." Mrs. Dorothy couldn't convince Margaret she was exaggerating. She left the property worried and decided to call James, asking Mr. Walter for his number. In the call, Mrs. Dorothy told him everything she had been observing. James was alarmed to learn his mother was spending even more money on preparations. "Mrs. Dorothy, could you keep an eye on her?" asked James. "I can't come now, but I'm worried." "Of course, son, but I think she needs professional help. I'll see if I can convince her to go to the doctor when I visit her at the end of the month." James scheduled a visit for the last week of May, planning to have a serious talk with his mother about her behavior. But he didn't know that by then many things would change. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her preparations. She had finished the external structure and was now working on the internal insulation. She used newspaper, cardboard, and even old fabrics to create insulating layers between the walls. She had also installed a small makeshift chimney for the wood heating. In mid-May, an unexpected event confirmed Margaret's concerns. A meteorologist from the university in Boulder published an article warning of climate anomalies that could result in a more severe than normal winter in the mountain region. Although the article wasn't as specific as Thomas's notes, it partially validated his predictions. Margaret cut out the article from the newspaper and kept it to show James when he came to visit her. She finally had an official source that supported her concerns, but the article also caught the attention of other people. Dr. Richard Henderson called Margaret a few days after the publication. "Mrs. Margaret, did you see the article in the newspaper about the winter?" he asked. "Yes, I did. This confirms that our proposal for investment in winter tourism was correct. Don't you think it would be a good time to reconsider our offer?" "No, Doctor. Now less than ever." "Why?" "Because if the winter is going to be severe, I'll need my house more than ever." "Don't you think it would be safer to move to the city?" "I've prepared to stay here. I saw your construction the last time I was there. It looks interesting. Did you use a specific plan?" Margaret became suspicious of his interest in her construction. "It was all improvised," she lied. "Would you mind if I brought an engineer there to take a look? We could even help with improvements." "No, thank you. Everything is as it needs to be." After that call, Margaret became even more suspicious of Richard's intentions. Why so much interest in her construction? And why did he insist so much on buying her property? The following week, she had an unpleasant surprise. Upon returning from town where she had gone to buy more supplies, she found signs that someone had been on her property during her absence. Some planks were slightly displaced, as if someone had tried to examine the structure of the building. Margaret was worried. She decided to install some makeshift locks to make access to her property more difficult. She also started sleeping with a tool beside the bed, in case she needed to defend herself. A few days later, Mrs. Dorothy appeared at her house with alarming news. "Margaret, did you see they're building a new road near the woods?" she asked. "New road? I haven't seen anything." "Machines showed up yesterday. They say it's for that tourism project." Margaret was intrigued. She decided to walk to the location Mrs. Dorothy had mentioned to see what was happening. When she got there, she found several heavy machines and men working on opening a road that led directly to the region where her property was located. One of the workers, seeing her observing, came to talk to her. "Are you a resident of this area?" he asked. "Yes, I am. May I know what you're doing?" "We're opening access for a new development, a ski resort. And do you have authorization for this?" "Yes, we do. The project was approved by the city council." Margaret returned home even more worried. If they were building a road, it meant the project was really moving forward. But why hadn't anyone informed the residents of the area? The following afternoon, James called saying he would come visit her that weekend. "Mum, I spoke with Mrs. Dorothy. She's very worried about you." "James, I'm fine, just preparing for winter." "Mum, you spent a lot of money on this construction. I'm coming over so we can talk." "All right, son, it will be good to see you." "And Mom, I brought a friend of mine who's an engineer. He can take a look at the construction and see if everything is safe." Margaret didn't like the idea, but she didn't want to create conflict before James even arrived. James arrived on Saturday morning, accompanied by a young man named Michael, who introduced himself as a civil engineer. Margaret received them with coffee and cornbread, but she could tell James was tense. "Mum, can I see this construction?" asked James. "Of course, son, I'll show you." Margaret took the two to see the structure she had built. Michael examined everything carefully, asking technical questions about the materials used and the structure. "Mrs. Margaret, may I ask what criteria you used to size this construction?" asked Michael. "I used my husband's notes," she replied. "Was your husband an engineer?" "He was a meteorologist. He calculated that we would need extra protection against a very harsh winter." Michael and James exchanged glances. "Mum, can I see those notes of Dad's?" asked James. Margaret hesitated but decided to show the papers. She took the two to the living room and opened the box where she kept Thomas's studies. Michael examined the notes carefully, jotting things down in a small notebook. "Mrs. Margaret, these notes are very interesting," said Michael. "Your husband really did detailed work." "So you believe he was right?" asked Margaret, hopeful. "Well, some of the calculations make sense," admitted Michael. "But it's hard to be sure without more recent data. There's a meteorologist at the university who published an article confirming that this winter could be harsher," said Margaret, showing the newspaper clipping. Michael read the article and became thoughtful. "Indeed, there are indications that there may be climate anomalies," he agreed, "but not necessarily at the intensity your husband predicted." "Even so, it's better to be prepared, isn't it?" argued Margaret. "Mum, the problem isn't being prepared," said James. "The problem is spending all your money on this. What if you're wrong?" "What if we're right?" countered Margaret. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out now. Continuing. That afternoon, James and Michael helped Margaret make some adjustments to the construction. Michael suggested improvements to the ventilation system to avoid moisture problems and also recommended changes in the firewood distribution to optimize heating. "Mum, if you insist on staying here during the winter, at least let's make sure everything is safe," said James. "Thank you, son. Does this mean you believe me?" "It means we want you to be safe, no matter what happens," replied James. During dinner, Michael asked several questions about Thomas's notes. He wanted to better understand the methodology he had used for his predictions. "Your husband correlated historical data with changes in wind and temperature patterns," explained Michael. "It's an interesting approach." "Thomas was always very meticulous," said Margaret. "He didn't make claims without basis." "What period are his predictions for?" asked Michael. "For the next few months. According to the calculations, the intense cold would start in early June and last until August." James nearly choked on his coffee. "Mom, June has barely started. We're still in autumn." "That's why I hurried to finish the construction," explained Margaret. Michael leafed through Thomas's notes again. Here he mentions a confluence of factors that would result in an early cold front, he observed. If he's right, it would indeed be something unusual. "Did you see they're building a road nearby?" asked Margaret. "For that winter tourism project?" "I saw the machines on the road," said James. "What about it?" "I find the coincidence strange. Just when the winter might be harsher, A company shows up wanting to develop winter tourism here. I don't see a coincidence, Mother. If there are forecasts of more intense winters, it's natural for investors to want to seize the opportunity. But they offered me a lot of money for the property, and the man from the company seemed very interested in my construction. Michael grew curious. What kind of interest? He wanted technical details, wanted to bring an engineer to examine it. I thought it was strange. Perhaps they're interested in the solution you developed, suggested Michael. If it works well, they might want to apply it to other projects. That night, James and Michael stayed at Margaret's house. In the early hours, Michael woke to a strange noise. He looked out the window and saw a pickup truck parked on the road, near the property. There was someone with a flashlight examining the external construction. Michael woke James without making a sound. "There's someone out there," he whispered. The two watched from the window. The person with the flashlight was taking pictures of the wooden structure Margaret had built. "Let's see who it is," said James. "Better not. It could be dangerous." They kept watching until the person returned to the pickup truck and drove away. In the morning, they told Margaret what had happened. "I knew someone was messing with my things," she said. "I've already found signs they've been here when I wasn't." "Do you have any idea who it could be?" asked Michael. "I suspect it's someone from the real estate company, that Dr. Richard was very interested in the construction." "Mother, that's trespassing. You should report it to the authorities." "And say what? That someone took pictures of my house? They'll think I'm making things up." Michael examined the ground around the house and found footprints in the damp soil. He also noticed some boards had small marks, as if someone had tried to measure or examine the structure. "Someone was definitely here," he confirmed, "and it seems they knew what they were looking for." That Sunday, before returning to Denver, James and Michael helped Margaret install some security improvements. They put sturdier locks in place and created a simple alarm system using cans tied with string at the property's access points. "Mother, if anything happens, call immediately," said James. "And if the weather gets too bad, go to Mrs. Dorothy's house or come to Denver." "I'll be fine, son. The construction will protect me." "And if it doesn't?" "It will. Your father knew what he was doing." After James and Michael left, Margaret felt more confident. Michael had confirmed that Thomas's notes made sense, and James, despite his worries, had helped improve the property's security. But she didn't know that Michael had taken some pictures of Thomas's notes, intending to show them to his meteorologist colleagues at the university. He was genuinely intrigued by the forecasts and wanted a second technical opinion. The following week, Margaret received another call from Dr. Richard. "Mrs. Margaret, I heard you had visitors over the weekend," he said. Margaret grew suspicious. "How did he know?" "I did, yes. My son came to visit me." "And he brought an engineer, didn't he? How do you know that?" "Ah, small town, right? Everyone finds out about everything. What did he think of your construction?" "He found it interesting." "Have you changed your mind about selling the property?" "No, even with the amount I'm offering." "Even so." "Mrs. Margaret, can I be frank with you?" "Of course." "Our project needs your property. It's located at a strategic point for the development of the ski resort. And if I don't want to sell, well, there are other ways to obtain land for public development." Margaret didn't like the tone of implicit threat in his words. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all, Mrs. Margaret. I'm just explaining that it would be better for everyone if we could reach a friendly agreement." "And if I don't want to make any agreement?" "Then we'll have to explore other legal alternatives." After that call, Margaret became even more worried. She decided to seek legal help to understand her rights as a property owner. At the town's notary office, she spoke with Dr. Edward, an elderly lawyer who had known the family for decades. "Margaret, dear, tell me what's happening," as he said, after hearing a summary of the situation. Margaret explained the attempts at forced purchase and the veiled threats from Dr. Richard. "This Dr. Richard, does he have any official documents?" asked Dr. Edward. "I haven't seen any documents, just the letters with purchase offers." "And about the ski resort project, have you seen any documentation at the City Hall?" "I haven't looked into it. Can you check?" "Yes, I can. I'll take a look at the licensing processes." Dr. Edward promised to investigate the legality of the project and the rights Margaret had as a property owner. He also suggested she document any attempts at trespassing on the property. A few days later, Dr. Edward called Margaret with worrying information. "Margaret, I found the file for the tourism project," he said. "There's something strange in the documents. What did you find?" "The project was approved very quickly, without the normal period of public consultation. And there's a clause about eminent domain for public interest." "Eminent domain? Can they take my property by force?" "They can, if they can justify it's in the public interest. But normally that only happens for essential infrastructure projects, not for private tourism ventures." "What can I do?" "I'll file an appeal questioning the legality of the process. But in the meantime, it's important that you document everything that's happening." That night, Margaret could barely sleep. The possibility of losing the family property through eminent domain left her desperate. Besides, if she were forced to leave, she would have nowhere to protect herself during the harsh winter that was approaching. The next morning, she woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Looking out the window, she saw that the road construction had advanced significantly overnight. They were working in continuous shifts to speed up the work. Margaret put on her coat and walked to where the men were working. "Excuse me," she called to the foreman. "Can you work through the night?" "We have authorization, yes, ma'am," replied the man without stopping what he was doing. "What kind of authorization?" "From the City Hall and the contracting company." "And where is this road going to pass?" The man stopped what he was doing and looked at Margaret suspiciously. "Are you a resident of the area?" "Yes, I am. My property is right there," she said, pointing to her house. "Ah, so you're the Mrs. Margaret that Dr. Richard mentioned." "He talked about me?" "Yes, he did. Said you might have to leave the property soon." Margaret was outraged. How could Dr. Richard spread information about her to the workers? "He has no right to talk about my situation," she protested. "Look, ma'am, I just follow orders," said the foreman. "If you have a problem with it, you have to sort it out with the people who hired us." Margaret returned home outraged. She immediately called Dr. Edward to tell him what had happened. "Margaret, this is intimidation," said the lawyer. "I'll expedite the appeal against the project." "How long will it take?" "A few weeks at minimum. Administrative processes are time-consuming." "But they're working day and night on the road." "That's exactly why I need to act quickly. I'll request an injunction to suspend the work until the legality is clarified." That afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected visit. 3 men in suits appeared on her property, saying they were representatives from the City Hall. "Mrs. Margaret Foster," one of them asked. "That's me." "We're from the City Hall Inspection Department. We've come to inspect your property." "Inspection for what?" "We received a complaint about an irregular construction." Margaret was shocked. Her construction was not irregular. She had followed all basic regulations and didn't need a special permit as it was an improvement on private property. "What complaint?" "Construction without a permit and possible structural risk." "May I see your identification documents?" The men showed City Hall badges, but Margaret found it strange they showed up without prior notice. "I'm going to call my lawyer," she said. "You have that right," one of them agreed, "but the inspection must be carried out." Margaret called Dr. Edward, who advised her to accompany the inspection but not allow them to touch anything without a court order. The inspectors examined the entire structure Margaret had built, taking notes and photos. One of them seemed particularly interested in the thermal insulation system. "Does this construction have any technical plans?" he asked. "It was based on my husband's studies." "Was your husband an engineer?" "He was a meteorologist." The inspectors exchanged glances. "Do you have the studies that served as the basis for the construction?" another asked. "Why do you need that?" "To assess if the structure was properly sized." Margaret hesitated. She didn't want to hand over Thomas's notes, but she also didn't want to create problems with the inspection. "I'll check if I have the notes organized," she said. "You have 15 days to present the technical documentation," the inspector informed her. "Otherwise, the construction may be considered irregular." After they left, Margaret called Dr. Edward again. "Doctor, can they force me to tear down the construction?" "They can, if there is truly an irregularity, but this seems more like a form of pressure to me." "What can I do?" I'll ask an engineer I trust to prepare a technical report on your construction. That should resolve the inspection issue. And how much will it cost? Don't worry about that now. The important thing is to protect your rights. That night, Margaret felt surrounded on all sides. The company wanted to buy her property by force, the city hall was questioning her construction, and strangers kept trespassing on her property at night. But what worried her most was time. According to Thomas's notes, the intense cold could begin at any moment. What if she was forced to leave the property before she could properly protect herself? The following week, Michael called Margaret with news about Thomas's notes. "Mrs. Margaret, I showed your husband's studies to some colleagues at the university," he said. "And what did they think?" "They were impressed by the precision of the calculations. One of the professors wants to speak with you." "Why does he want to speak with me?" "Because your husband's predictions are very specific and seem to be coming true. There have been changes in weather patterns in recent weeks that coincide exactly with what he predicted." Margaret felt relieved. Finally, someone was validating Thomas's work. "Does this mean the severe winter is really going to happen?" "The chances are very high. The professor wants to publish a study based on your husband's notes, of course, with proper credit." "And could this help prove that my construction was necessary?" "Absolutely. If the predictions are confirmed, your preparation will be seen as a smart preventive measure." 2 days later, Professor Dr. Patterson from the university called Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret, I'm a meteorologist, and I was fascinated by your husband's studies," he said. "May I visit you to speak in person?" "Of course, Doctor. It will be a pleasure to have you. I would also like to examine the construction you made based on his predictions." "Be my guest, Doctor." Patterson arrived at Margaret's property on a Thursday afternoon, accompanied by 2 research assistants. He was a man of about 50, with graying hair and glasses, who exuded academic seriousness. "Mrs. Margaret, it's an honor to meet you," he said. "Your husband's work is remarkable." "Thank you, Doctor. Thomas would be happy to know his work is being recognized." Dr. Patterson examined all of Thomas's notes in detail, asking questions about the methodology he had used and the historical data that formed the basis for the predictions. "Your husband correlated information from different sources very cleverly," he observed, "and his conclusions are proving to be correct." "So the severe winter is really going to happen?" "It's already happening, Mrs. Margaret. Temperatures have started dropping earlier than normal, and the wind patterns have changed exactly as your husband predicted." One of the assistants showed temperature graphs from the last few weeks. "Look here," he said, pointing to the curves. "The temperature drop is following exactly the projection in the notes." "And when is the most intense cold expected to arrive?" asked Margaret. "According to your husband's calculations, within a week," replied Dr. Patterson. "That's why your preparation was so important." Dr. Patterson and his assistants were impressed with the construction Margaret had made. They examined the insulation system, the ventilation layout, and the heating plan. "This structure was very well thought out," said Dr. Patterson. "Did you follow the technical guidance in the notes?" "I followed it as best I could. Thomas had calculated the insulation and protection requirements, and it worked perfectly. This construction should withstand the extreme temperatures that are forecast well." Before leaving, Dr. Patterson made an unexpected proposal. "Mrs. Margaret, we would like to install some meteorological monitoring equipment here on your property," he said. "It would be important to track how your construction performs during the period of intense cold." "What kind of equipment?" "Thermometers, humidity, and wind gauges, nothing that will disrupt your routine." "And what are these data for?" "To prove the effectiveness of the solutions you developed. If it works well, it could serve as a model for others." Margaret agreed to the installation of the equipment. In fact, she felt reassured to know that university scientists would be monitoring her situation. "One last thing, Mrs. Margaret," said Dr. Patterson before leaving. "Are you sure you want to stay here alone during the most critical period?" "Yes, I am. I prepared for this." "Then let's maintain daily contact by phone. If anything goes wrong, we can send help immediately." That night, Margaret felt more confident than she had in weeks. She finally had the scientific backing she needed to prove that her concerns were well-founded and that her preparation had been necessary. But the next morning she received a disturbing call from Dr. Edward. "Margaret, I have bad news," said the lawyer. "The city council has approved an order to expropriate your property." "What do you mean? Didn't you say you were going to file an appeal?" "I did, but they expedited the process. They claim urgency for the development of public interest tourism infrastructure." "And now?" "You have 72 hours to vacate the property." Margaret was desperate. After months of preparation, she would be forced to abandon her shelter just when she needed it most. "Can't you do anything?" "I'll try for an injunction in court, but there might not be time." "What if I refuse to leave?" "They can use police force to remove you." Margaret hung up the phone in shock. Everything she had worked for was about to be destroyed. An hour later, Dr. Richard Henderson appeared at her property. "Mrs. Margaret, I heard about the expropriation order," he said, with a smile that didn't hide his satisfaction. "Did you have something to do with this?" "I merely helped the city understand the project's importance for the local economy." "Did you know this was going to happen when you offered me money for the property? Let's say I preferred to settle things amicably." "And now?" "Now you can accept our compensation offer for the expropriation, or you can leave with nothing." "How much are you offering?" "Half of what I originally offered." Margaret was outraged. "This is extortion. These are the terms of the expropriation. You have 72 hours to decide." After Dr. Richard left, Margaret called James to tell him what was happening. "Mom, come to Denver right now," he said. "It's not worth fighting them. James, if I leave now, I won't have anywhere to protect myself from the cold." "Mom, you can stay at our house." "What if I'm right about the winter? Your house isn't prepared." "Mom, even if it gets cold, it won't be anything we can't handle with normal heating." "You don't understand, son. Your father predicted extreme temperatures." James was silent for a few seconds. "Mom, I'll talk to Michael. Maybe he has an idea." An hour later, Michael called Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret, James told me about the expropriation," he said. "I have a proposal." "What proposal?" "What if we disassemble your structure and reassemble it somewhere else?" "Where?" "My family has a plot of land in Aspen. It's a mountainous area, similar to here. We can transport all the materials and rebuild the shelter there." Margaret became thoughtful. It was a possibility she hadn't considered. "How long would it take?" "If we start today, we can have everything assembled in 2 days. And do you think there will be enough time?" "If the intense cold only arrives next week, as predicted, yes." "And if there isn't enough time?" "Then at least we will have tried, and you will have a safe place to live after it all passes." Margaret decided to accept the proposal. It was better to try to save at least part of her preparation than to lose everything. That afternoon, James, Michael, and 2 more friends arrived with a truck to begin disassembling the structure. They worked until late at night, carefully removing the planks and numbering each piece to facilitate reassembly. Dr. Patterson, who learned of the situation, offered help to transport the monitoring equipment to the new location. "Mrs. Margaret, we will continue monitoring your situation," he said. "The important thing is that you stay protected." The next day, the moving operation continued. Margaret packed her personal belongings, the supplies she had stored, and Joachim's precious notes. Mrs. Dorothy helped with the organization and promised to keep in touch. "Dear, take good care of yourself," said the neighbor with tears in her eyes. "I hope you're wrong about this winter." "I hope so too, Mrs. Dorothy, but it's better to be prepared." At noon, the trucks departed for Aspen, carrying the entire disassembled structure and Margaret's belongings. She looked one last time at the property where she had been born and raised, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. Dr. Richard appeared just before her departure. "Mrs. Margaret, you can still reconsider our offer," he said. "No, thank you. I'd rather leave with nothing than accept money from you." "You will regret this decision." "I think it is you who will regret it. When the cold arrives, you will understand why I prepared." The land in Aspen was in a mountainous region, surrounded by pine trees with a panoramic view of the ridge. It was smaller than Margaret's original property, but suitable for the construction. Michael had planned everything in detail. They chose a location sheltered from the wind to erect the structure, near a water source, and with easy access to the wood supply. The reassembly began immediately. James, Michael, and their friends worked diligently, following the notes Margaret had made during the original construction. Dr. Patterson sent 2 students to help and reinstall the monitoring equipment. By the end of the second day, the construction was practically complete. Margaret inspected every detail, comparing it to the original structure. "It turned out even better than the first one," observed Michael. "The land here is more suitable for the drainage system." "And the thermal insulation?" asked Margaret. "Same as the original. We used exactly the same materials and the same layout." That night, Margaret slept for the first time in the new construction. She was exhausted, but relieved to have managed to maintain her protection against the approaching cold. The next morning, Dr. Patterson called with urgent news. "Mrs. Margaret, temperatures began to plummet overnight," he said. "The intense cold arrived earlier than expected." "How much did it drop?" "We're already 10 degrees below normal for this time of year, and the forecast is for it to keep falling." Margaret looked out the window and saw that strong winds were already starting. The trees were swaying worryingly. "And what is the situation like there in Highland Ridge?" she asked. "Complicated. Many people were caught unprepared. There's a lack of adequate heating and problems with the electricity supply." "And the road construction?" "It's been suspended. The workers can't operate the machinery in this cold." During the day, the temperature continued to drop dramatically. Margaret tested her heating system and was pleased to see it was working perfectly. The construction maintained a comfortable internal temperature, even with the intense cold outside. James called, worried. "Mom, how are things there?" "I'm fine, son. The construction is working perfectly." "Here in Denver, it's also unusually cold. We didn't expect this." "How are you managing?" "We bought electric heaters, but the electricity bill is going to be expensive. And there are parts of the city where the power went out due to grid overload. You can come here if you need to." "Thank you, Mom. If the situation gets worse, we might take you up on that." On the afternoon of the third day, Dr. Patterson visited Margaret to check how she was coping with the extreme cold. "Mrs. Margaret, the temperature reached 15 degrees below zero overnight," he reported. "It's the lowest temperature ever recorded in this region." "How are the people?" "Many have had to leave their homes. The public shelters are packed." "And there in Highland Ridge?" "The situation is critical. Several houses have had problems with frozen pipes, and that real estate company has suspended all activities." "Has Dr. Richard shown up again?" "From what I heard, he returned to Denver as soon as the cold began. He left all the projects suspended." Dr. Patterson examined the data collected by the monitoring equipment installed in Margaret's construction. "It's incredible how the structure is maintaining a stable internal temperature," he observed. "The difference between the outside and inside temperature reaches 20 degrees. Thomas's notes included thermal insulation calculations," explained Margaret. "He predicted exactly these conditions." "Your husband was a genius. This project could save many lives if replicated." During the following week, the cold remained intense. Margaret received daily calls from Dr. Patterson, who monitored her situation and shared the monitoring results with the scientific community. James called every day, increasingly impressed with his father's forecast accuracy. "Mom, Dad really knew what he was doing," he admitted. "If you hadn't prepared, you could have suffered a lot." "That's why I insisted so much, son. Your father was never wrong about these things." "And how is your food supply?" "Fine. I calculated for 3 months of intense cold." 3 months? Will it last that long?" "According to Dad's notes, yes. The winter will be long." Mrs. Dorothy also called regularly. She had temporarily moved to a daughter's house in the city, as her home wasn't prepared for the extreme cold. "Dear, you were right," she admitted. "If I had stayed in my house, I'd be suffering a lot now." "How are the other people in the region?" "Many had to leave. The houses aren't prepared for this cold, and we're used to harsh winters, but this is beyond anything we've ever experienced." 2 weeks after the extreme cold began, Margaret received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Richard. "Mrs. Margaret, how are you managing through this difficult period?" he asked, with a humility she hadn't perceived before. "I'm well, thank you." "And you?" "To be honest, poorly. The ski resort project has been suspended indefinitely." "Because of the cold?" Because of everything. The extreme cold damaged equipment, the workers can't operate, and the investors are reconsidering the project. I understand. Mrs. Margaret, may I ask a question? You may. How did you know this was going to happen? Margaret hesitated before answering. My husband conducted detailed studies on climate changes in the region. And the construction you did? How did you know it would work? Everything was in his notes. Dr. Richard was silent for a few seconds. Mrs. Margaret, I would like to apologize for my behavior, he said finally. I shouldn't have pressured you to sell the property. I accept your apology. And I would like to make a proposal. If you're interested, we would like to hire you as a consultant. A consultant for what? To develop extreme cold protection solutions. What you built could save many lives. Margaret was surprised by the turn of events. I need to think about this. Of course. You can call me when you decide. After the call, Margaret reflected on the proposal. At first, she didn't like the idea of working with people who had tried to force her off her property. But on the other hand, if she could help other people protect themselves against extreme cold, maybe it would be worth it. Dr. Patterson visited her again the following week, bringing good news. Mrs. Margaret, the data we collected here is impressing the international scientific community, he said. We want to publish a detailed study on your thermal protection solution. And can that help other people? Certainly. We've already received inquiries from several regions facing similar problems. Then I agree. There's something else. The university would like to offer a posthumous tribute to your husband. His work deserves recognition. Margaret was moved. Thomas would be very happy about that. And you, would you like to give some lectures on the practical experience of applying his studies? Me? But I don't have a technical background. You have something better. You have real experience, and that is very valuable. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the following month, temperatures remained extremely low. The Highland Ridge region recorded historic snowfalls, and many communities were isolated. But Margaret remained safe and comfortable in her structure. Michael visited Margaret a few times during this period, bringing additional supplies and checking that everything was working well. Mrs. Margaret, you've become a celebrity, he said during one visit. Did you know people are coming from far away just to see your structure? Really? Engineers, architects, researchers, everyone wants to understand how it works. And what do you tell them? That it was based on your husband's scientific studies and your determination to prepare properly. Michael also brought news about Highland Ridge. The town has practically come to a standstill, he told her. Many families had to be accommodated in temporary shelters, and that real estate company went bankrupt. Dr. Richard went bankrupt? Not him personally, but the ski resort project was definitively cancelled. The investors lost a lot of money. And my original property? It's still condemned, but now no one knows what to do with it. The land is abandoned. Margaret felt sad to know the family property was abandoned, but relieved to have saved what mattered most, her safety and Thomas's precious notes. In March, after 3 months of extreme cold, temperatures finally began to rise. Margaret left her structure for the first time in weeks to examine the surroundings. The landscape was transformed. There was accumulated snow in some places, and many trees had branches broken by the weight of the ice. But gradually, nature showed signs of recovery. Dr. Patterson arrived to monitor the first days of milder weather. Mrs. Margaret, we've come through the most critical period, he said. Your husband's predictions came true with impressive accuracy. And now? She asked. Now we will analyze all the data we collected and prepare the scientific study. But I can say in advance that your solution worked perfectly. Can other people use this solution? We hope so. We're already developing technical manuals based on your project. James came to visit Margaret as soon as the roads were passable again. He was accompanied by his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 young children. Mum, I have no words to say how I feel, he said, hugging Margaret. If you had listened to me and not prepared, I don't know what would have happened. Your father always said it's better to prepare for something that doesn't happen than to be caught unprepared when it does, replied Margaret. The grandchildren want to see their grandmother's famous structure, said Jennifer, smiling. Margaret was happy to show her grandchildren how she had protected herself during the harsh winter. The children were fascinated by the heating system and thermal insulation. "Grandma, you're so smart," said the eldest granddaughter. "The smart one was Grandpa Thomas, dear. I just followed his instructions." That weekend, Margaret received many visitors. Mrs. Dorothy came to see the new house. Dr. Edward brought good news about recovering part of the value of the condemned property, and several researchers came to document the details of the structure. Dr. Patterson organized a small ceremony to honor Thomas. They planted a tree on the property and placed a plaque recognizing his contribution to meteorology. "Thomas Foster, visionary who predicted and protected," the plaque read. Margaret was moved by the tribute. "Thomas would be proud to know his work helped so many people," she said. A few weeks later, Dr. Richard Henderson appeared again. This time, he was accompanied by other businessmen. "Mrs. Margaret, we would like to make a formal proposal," he said. "We want to develop a project for constructions resistant to extreme weather, based on your experience." "What kind of project?" "Houses and community shelters that can withstand harsh winters, like the one we just experienced. You would be our lead consultant." Margaret listened to the proposal carefully. It was an opportunity to transform the difficult experience she had lived through into something that could benefit many other people. "May I think about it?" "Of course. But we would like to start as soon as possible. There are many regions that may face similar problems in the coming years." Margaret discussed the proposal with James and Michael. Both thought it would be a good opportunity. "Mother, you could help many families protect themselves properly," said James, "and at the same time, honor Dad's memory." "It's a way to continue his work," agreed Michael. A week later, Margaret accepted the proposal. The first task would be to develop low-cost designs that could be implemented in rural communities. Dr. Patterson offered technical support from the university to scientifically validate the designs. Dr. Edward took charge of the legal aspects of the new venture. 6 months after the end of the extreme winter, Margaret was supervising the construction of the first prototypes of community shelters. The pilot project would be implemented in 3 towns in the Highlands that had been particularly affected by the cold. James and Michael were actively participating in the project. James handled the administrative part, while Michael supervised the technical aspects of the construction. "Mother, we already have project orders from 7 different states," reported James in a meeting. "And the technical manuals are being translated into other languages," added Dr. Patterson. "There is international interest in the solution you developed." Margaret felt fulfilled, seeing that the difficult experience she had lived through was turning into something positive for so many people. Mrs. Dorothy, who had moved to a new house better prepared for the cold, visited Margaret regularly. "My dear, you have become a very important person," she said during one of her visits. "It wasn't my merit, Mrs. Dorothy. It all started with Thomas's studies. But you were the one who had the courage to believe in them and prepare, and now you're helping so many people. It's good to know the suffering we went through served a purpose." 1 year after the extreme winter, Margaret participated in an international conference on climate adaptation. Her lecture on community preparedness for extreme climate events was highly praised. "Mrs. Margaret, you have become a world reference on this subject," said the conference organizer. "It's a great responsibility," she replied, "but it's important to share what we've learned." During the conference, Margaret met people from various countries facing similar challenges with climate change. She was impressed to see how her simple, practical experience could be useful in such different contexts. Back in the United States, the Community Shelter Project had expanded significantly. More than 50 communities had already implemented solutions based on the model developed by Margaret. Dr. Patterson published a book about the experience titled The Wisdom of Preparation: How a Highland Widow Predicted and Survived the Winter of the Century. The book became a bestseller and generated additional resources to fund new projects. James suggested that part of the resources be used to create a foundation in memory of Thomas. "Dad would be happy to know his name is associated with a project that helps so many people," he said. The Thomas Foster Foundation for Climate Adaptation was established 2 years after the extreme winter. Margaret assumed the presidency with technical support from Dr. Patterson and administrative management from James. The foundation developed several projects, including early warning systems for extreme weather events, community preparedness training, and distribution of emergency kits for families in vulnerable situations. Dr. Richard, who had lost a lot of money with the failure of the tourism project, became an important partner for the foundation. His business experience was valuable in making the projects financially sustainable. Mrs. Margaret, working with you has taught me a lot about humility and proper preparation, he said in a meeting. I learned that what seems like a good business deal isn't always truly good. We all make mistakes, Dr. Richard. What matters is learning from them. 5 years after the extreme winter, Margaret had become a nationally respected figure. She received several honors and awards for her contribution to preparing vulnerable communities. But what made her most proud was knowing that hundreds of families were now better prepared to face extreme weather events, thanks to the solutions developed from the experience she and Thomas lived through. James moved to Aspen to work closer to his mother in expanding the foundation's projects. Jennifer opened a small inn in the region, taking advantage of the flow of researchers and visitors interested in Margaret's work. Margaret's grandchildren grew up proud of their famous grandmother, but she always made a point of explaining that the true hero of the story was their grandfather, Thomas. Grandpa Thomas knew that big storms need big preparation, she would tell the children, and big preparation requires the courage to do what others think is strange. Michael, who had specialized in climate-resilient construction, opened a company focused on residential and commercial projects adapted for extreme conditions. All projects were based on the principles developed by Margaret and scientifically validated by Dr. Patterson. Mrs. Margaret, without your courage to build that first structure, none of this would exist, said Michael in an interview for a specialized magazine. The courage came from the love I felt for Thomas and the trust in his work, replied Margaret. When we love someone, we do things that seem impossible. Dr. Patterson, who had become a close collaborator and friend of the family, often commented on the scientific impact of Thomas's work. Your husband's notes revolutionized our understanding of predicting extreme weather events on a local scale, he said in a lecture. He combined rigorous science with practical knowledge in a unique way. Mrs. Dorothy, now over 75 years old, became a kind of informal ambassador for the project. She told everyone the story of how Margaret had prepared for the harsh winter. People thought she was going crazy, Mrs. Dorothy would say. But she knew what she was doing, and she saved not only her own life but the lives of many people who now have a place to take shelter. 7 years after the extreme winter, a new challenging weather situation was approaching. Meteorological models indicated the possibility of a severe drought in the mountain region, followed by torrential rains. Margaret, now 60 years old and highly respected for her experience, was consulted by local authorities on how to prepare the population. Mrs. Margaret, what should we do? Asked the mayor of Aspen in a meeting. The same thing we did for the extreme cold, she replied. Study, prepare, and act before the problem arrives. The foundation developed a new project, this time focused on water collection and storage, drainage systems, and flood protection. Once again, early preparation was key to minimizing the impacts. James, now 40 years old and very experienced in managing social projects, coordinated the implementation of preventive measures in over 100 communities. Mum, I've learned that preparation isn't paranoia, he said. It's responsibility. Your father always said that, replied Margaret, smiling. Thomas would be proud to see how you've learned the lesson. During the implementation of the new project, Margaret received a special visit. A delegation of Japanese meteorologists came to the United States specifically to learn about her work. Mrs. Margaret, in Japan we study a great deal about disaster preparedness, said the delegation leader. But your approach to community preparedness based on local knowledge is unique. Do you want to implement something similar in Japan? Asked Margaret. We want to learn your methods to adapt to our conditions. Each place has its specific challenges, but the principles of preparedness are universal. The Japanese visit resulted in a technical exchange program. Some Americans went to Japan to learn about earthquake and tsunami preparedness, while Japanese technicians came to the United States to study preparedness for extreme weather events. Dr. Patterson was fascinated by the possibilities of international cooperation. "Mrs. Margaret, your work is creating a worldwide network of community preparedness," he said. "Thomas could never have imagined his notes would have such a broad impact." "Thomas always said knowledge is useless if it isn't shared," replied Margaret. "I think he would be happy to know he's helping people all over the world." At 62, Margaret decided to write a book telling her own version of the story. She wanted future generations to understand the importance of listening to nature's signs and preparing properly. The book, titled "Nobody Understood Why I Built a Barn Around the House," Until the Cold Came, became an international bestseller and was translated into more than 20 languages. "Grandma, you're famous all over the world," said her eldest granddaughter, now 15. "I'm not famous, dear. I was just lucky to have a very smart husband and the courage to believe in him," replied Margaret. "But Grandma, you were also very brave. You could have given up when everyone thought you were wrong. Sometimes, dear, we need to have the courage to do what we think is right, even when others don't understand, but always based on solid knowledge, like your grandfather's studies." The success of the book brought additional resources to the foundation, allowing the projects to expand to other countries in Latin America. Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay implemented community preparedness programs based on the model developed by Margaret. Dr. Richard Henderson, who had become a close friend of the family over the years, was responsible for coordinating the international expansion of the projects. "Mrs. Margaret, when I first met you, I thought I was dealing with a stubborn person who would get in the way of our plans," he said in an informal conversation. "Today I know it was I who understood nothing about proper preparation." "We've all learned, Dr. Henderson. What's important is that we're now working together to help other people." 10 years after the extreme winter, the Highland Ridge region faced another period of intense cold, though not as severe as that first one. This time, however, the population was prepared. The community shelters worked perfectly. Families had adequate stocks of supplies and fuel. The heating systems installed in schools and health posts ensured that essential services continued to function. "Mrs. Margaret, this time no one had to leave their home because of the cold," reported the mayor of Aspen. "The preparation worked perfectly." "That's how it should be," replied Margaret. "Proper preparation means that when the problem arrives, we already have the solution ready." James, who monitored the results of the Foundation's various projects, was impressed by the effectiveness of the preventive measures. "Mom, in 10 years, we've helped over 1,000 communities prepare adequately," he said. "How many families were directly benefited?" "More than 50,000 families have access to the shelters and systems we developed," answered Margaret, "not counting those who learned individual preparation techniques. Dad would be proud of these numbers. I'm sure he would, but I think he'd be even prouder to know that we continue studying and learning. Preparation never ends." Michael, whose company had become a national reference in climate-adapted construction, often credited Margaret for his professional success. "Everything I know about climate-resistant construction I learned from Mrs. Margaret," he would say in interviews. "She taught me that engineering isn't just calculation, it's also common sense and careful preparation." Dr. Patterson, who was approaching retirement, decided to dedicate his final years of academic career to systematizing all the knowledge developed over the decade. "Mrs. Margaret, let's create a university course on community preparation for extreme events," he proposed. "We want future generations of professionals to learn these principles from the start of their training." "That's an excellent idea, Dr. Patterson. Thomas always said that education is the best preparation tool." The course was created at the university and soon became a national reference. Students of engineering, meteorology, architecture, and social work came from all over the country to learn the principles of community preparation developed by Margaret. Mrs. Dorothy, who had followed her friend's entire journey, often commented on the transformation she had witnessed. "Dear, when you started building that strange thing around the house, I thought you'd lost your mind," she said during one visit. "Today I see it was I who understood nothing. Mrs. Dorothy, you gave me so much support, even thinking I was wrong. That was important to me. It's just that I worried about you. But I learned that sometimes worrying means giving the person space to do what they think is right. At 65, Margaret received an honorary doctorate from the university in recognition of her contribution to applied science and social development. Mrs. Margaret, it is an honor to bestow this title upon someone who transformed theoretical knowledge into practical solutions that saved lives, said the Dean during the ceremony. I accept this title in the name of my husband Thomas, who was the true scientist in the family, replied Margaret in her speech, and I dedicate it to all the families who had the courage to prepare adequately for the challenges life presents. The ceremony was broadcast live and watched by thousands of people in various countries. Margaret had become an international symbol of community preparation and resilience. James watched the ceremony with tears in his eyes. "Mom, Dad was right when he said you were the bravest person he knew," he said after the ceremony. "Courage is doing what needs to be done, even when we're afraid," answered Margaret. "I was very afraid during that winter, but I knew I had to trust your father's work." 15 years after the extreme winter, Margaret decided it was time to pass the Foundation's leadership to the new generation. James assumed the presidency, while she became honorary chairwoman. "Mum, do you have any advice for me?" asked James at the inauguration ceremony. "Never stop studying, never stop preparing, and always trust in solid knowledge," she replied. "And remember, preparation isn't fear, it's love. We prepare because we love our family and our community." Dr. Patterson, now retired, continued to collaborate with the Foundation as a volunteer consultant. He and Margaret became great friends over the years. "Margaret, do you know you've transformed not only your own life but the lives of thousands of people?" he said in a conversation. "Dr. Patterson, I think all those people are the ones who transformed my life. I learned much more by teaching than I thought I knew." That is the mark of a true educator. Thomas chose his partner well. Michael, who had expanded his company to operate in several countries, often returned to visit Margaret and ask for advice on new projects. "Mrs. Margaret, I'm developing an emergency housing project for climate refugees," he told her during a visit. "Can I use the principles we learned here?" "Of course, Michael, and if you need help adapting the solutions for different climates, the Foundation can collaborate. You always think big. It's impressive how a local solution can have a global impact. Thomas used to say that good ideas have no borders. If it works well in one place, it can be adapted for others." Mrs. Dorothy, now 80 years old, still visited Margaret regularly. Despite her advanced age, she maintained her usual clarity and humor. "Dear, you've become a very important person, but you're still the same simple Margaret I've always known," she observed. "It's because deep down I haven't changed, Mrs. Dorothy. I'm still the widow who wanted to protect herself from the cold. It's just that now I help other people protect themselves too. And that's where greatness lies, dear. Great people are those who don't forget where they came from." At 70, Margaret decided to write a second book, this time focused on the practical aspects of community preparation. The book, The Preparation Manual, Lessons from a Decade of Helping Communities, became a reference guide for professionals in the field. During the book launch, a young journalist asked her what the secret was to the success of the projects she developed. "The secret is that there is no secret," replied Margaret, smiling. "It's to study well, plan carefully, involve the community from the start, and never stop learning from the results." "And what motivates you to keep working after so long?" "The certainty that there are still many families who need to learn to prepare properly. As long as there are people vulnerable to extreme events, there will be work for us." James, who had become a very competent manager, expanded the Foundation's reach even further. Under his leadership, the projects reached communities in Africa and Asia. "Mother, we've received an invitation to implement a pilot project in Bangladesh," he told her in a meeting. "They face regular cyclones and floods." "It's an opportunity to learn a great deal," replied Margaret. "Each extreme situation teaches something new about preparation." "Would you like to come along on the first reconnaissance trip?" "I would love to. At 70, I still have much to learn." The trip to Bangladesh was a transformative experience for Margaret. She saw entire communities that had developed creative ways to adapt to adverse climate conditions. "James, They have solutions we never thought of, she said during the trip. Floating houses, farming systems adapted to floods, methods of preserving food without refrigeration. We'll be able to learn a lot here to apply in other places. Exactly. Preparation is a two-way street. We teach and learn at the same time. The collaboration with Bangladesh resulted in a very rich exchange. Techniques developed in the Highland Ridge were adapted to local conditions, while Bangladeshi solutions inspired new projects in the United States. Dr. Richard, who had become an expert in corporate sustainability, often commented on the lessons he had learned from Margaret. Mrs. Margaret taught me that sustainable success comes from careful preparation and long-term vision, he would say in business lectures. When I tried to speed up processes and ignore warning signs, I lost a lot of money. When I started planning properly, the results improved significantly. At 75, Margaret received a special tribute from the United Nations for her contribution to disaster risk reduction. It was the first time a person without formal technical training had received this recognition. Mrs. Margaret, you represent the best of humanity, the ability to turn knowledge into action and action into collective benefit, said the UN Secretary-General during the ceremony. I accept this tribute on behalf of all the communities that had the courage to prepare properly, replied Margaret, and in memory of my husband Thomas, who taught me that preparation is an act of love. During her speech at the UN, Margaret spoke about the importance of valuing local knowledge and the wisdom of ordinary people. We don't need to be scientists to understand that change requires preparation, she said. We need to be observant, courageous, and willing to act even when others don't understand. James watched his mother's speech with immense pride. Mother, you have inspired an entire generation of people to prepare properly, he said after the ceremony. And you will inspire the next generation, replied Margaret. What's important is that the knowledge continues to be passed on and applied. Michael, who had become a successful social entrepreneur, decided to create a technical school specialized in climate-adapted construction. The school was named the Thomas Foster Institute of Adaptive Technology. Mrs. Margaret, we want to train professionals who combine technical knowledge with social sensitivity, he explained during the project presentation. Thomas would be moved to know his name is on a school, said Margaret. He always believed that education is the foundation of all preparation. Dr. Patterson, even retired, agreed to be the academic director of the institute. It's a way to ensure that rigorous scientific principles continue to be the basis of everything we do, he said. At 80 years old, Mrs. Dorothy was still lucid and active. During one of her visits to Margaret, she made an observation that deeply touched her friend. "My dear, do you know what impresses me most about this whole story?" she asked. "What, Mrs. Dorothy?" "It's that you never lost your simplicity. You're still the same person who carried firewood and prepared yerba mate every morning." "It's because deep down I'm still the same person, Mrs. Dorothy. Only now I carry firewood to warm not just my house, but the hearts of many people who need to feel prepared and protected. That's why everyone trusts you, because they know you understand what it's like to be afraid and need protection." Margaret reflected on her friend's words. Truly, her entire journey had begun with fear. Fear of the cold, fear of not being prepared, fear of losing everything. But she had transformed that fear into constructive action. James, now over 50, often brought his grandchildren to visit their grandmother. The children loved hearing stories about the famous winter and how their grandmother had prepared. "Grandma, were you scared when you built the protection around the house?" asked the youngest grandson. "I was very scared, dear," replied Margaret. "Scared of the cold, scared of being wrong, scared that people would think I was crazy." "Then why did you do it anyway?" "Because sometimes we have to do hard things to protect those we love. And I loved your grandfather Thomas very much and trusted in his work." "And now? Are you still scared?" "Now I'm afraid of other things. Afraid that people will stop preparing. Afraid they'll forget the lessons we learned. But I use that fear to keep working and teaching." Conversations with her grandchildren always inspired Margaret to stay active in the foundation, even at 75. Dr. Patterson organized an international conference to commemorate the 20 years since the extreme winter. Researchers from over 40 countries came to the United States to discuss advances in community preparedness. "Margaret, you've created a global movement," he said during the conference opening. "Communities all over the world are applying the principles you developed." "Dr. Patterson, I think we just planted a seed. It was all these people who nurtured it so it could grow and bear fruit." During the conference, young researchers presented studies based on the methods developed by Margaret. She was moved to see how her simple ideas had evolved and become sophisticated. "It's amazing to see how simple knowledge can be the foundation for such advanced developments," she commented to James. "Mother, you always said that good foundations allow for solid constructions. That's exactly what happened." One of the most emotional moments of the conference was when a delegation from Bangladesh presented the results of 10 years of collaboration with the foundation. They had developed innovative solutions that were being replicated in other Asian countries. "Mrs. Margaret, you taught us that preparation is not a luxury, it's a basic necessity," said the delegation leader. "Our communities are much safer now." "And you taught us that simple solutions can be very effective," replied Margaret. "We learned as much as we taught." Michael presented at the conference the project to expand the Thomas Foster Institute to other countries. There was already interest from universities in Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. "Mrs. Margaret, in 5 years we'll have professionals trained by the Institute working throughout Latin America," he said. "Thomas would be impressed to know his name is associated with training so many professionals," replied Margaret. Dr. Richard, who had become a respected consultant in the field of business sustainability, presented a study on the economic impact of community preparedness projects. "Mrs. Margaret, we calculated that every dollar invested in preparation saves at least $5 in damages and recovery," he reported. "That means preparation is not an expense. It's an investment," observed Margaret. "Exactly. You taught me that proper preparation is always cheaper than dealing with the consequences of being unprepared." During the conference closing, Margaret gave a speech that was considered one of the most inspiring of her career. 20 years ago, I was just a frightened widow who wanted to protect herself from a harsh winter," she said. "Today I see that fear led me to discover something very important. When we prepare properly, we not only protect ourselves, but we create conditions to help others too." My husband Thomas's knowledge could have stayed stored in a box in the attic. But when I decided to trust it and act, that knowledge multiplied and spread throughout the world. That taught me that knowledge only serves when it's shared and applied. You, young researchers, have a great responsibility. You have the most advanced knowledge that has ever existed about preparing for extreme events. But it will only serve if you reach the simple people in vulnerable communities and teach in a way they can understand and apply. Preparation is not a privilege for those with money or formal education. It is the right of every family that wants to protect those they love. Our job is to make that right accessible to everyone. Margaret's speech received a standing ovation for several minutes. Many conference participants left inspired to dedicate their careers to community preparedness. James was moved to see the impact his mother had on people. "Mom, you are a true leader. You inspire people all over the world." James, leadership isn't about being important. It's about being useful. And it's about enabling other people to be useful too. At 78, Margaret decided it was time to systematize all her knowledge into one final project, a free online course on family preparedness for extreme events. "I want any family anywhere in the world to be able to learn the basic principles of preparedness," she said to James. "Mum, that will require a lot of work. Are you sure you want to dedicate yourself to this?" "James, Thomas left me a legacy of knowledge. I need to ensure that legacy continues to reach the people who need it." The course was developed with support from the university and several international organizations. It was translated into more than 30 languages and made available for free on the internet. Dr. Patterson, even though he was over 80, insisted on participating in the project. "Margaret, this course could be my last major academic work," he said. "I want it to be perfect." "Dr. Patterson, you have already contributed so much to this work. You should rest. Margaret, knowledge doesn't rest, and as long as I can contribute, I will keep working. The launch of the online course was an extraordinary success. Within 6 months, more than 1 million people had enrolled. Families all over the world were learning how to prepare for different types of extreme events. Michael created a version of the course specifically for construction professionals, teaching climate-resilient building techniques that could be applied to low-cost housing. Mrs. Margaret, we have democratized access to the knowledge you developed, he said. Now anyone can learn how to prepare properly. That's how it should always be, Michael. Knowledge that saves lives cannot be the privilege of a few. Mrs. Dorothy, even at 83, still visited Margaret regularly. During one of her last visits, she made a profound observation. "My dear, do you know what your greatest contribution to the world has been?" she asked. "What, Mrs. Dorothy?" "It was showing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they trust in knowledge and have the courage to act. I think anyone in my situation would have done the same thing." "No, my dear. Most people would have listened to those who said they were overreacting. You had the courage to trust in what you knew was right." Margaret reflected on her friend's words. Truly, there were times when she almost gave up, especially when everyone said she was wasting time and money. At 80, Margaret received the title of honorary citizen from more than 20 cities in the United States and several foreign cities. But the tribute that moved her the most was when the primary school in Highland Ridge was renamed the Thomas Foster State School. "Finally, Dad's name is on a school," James said during the inauguration ceremony. "Thomas loved children," Margaret replied. "He would be happy to know his name is on a place where they learn and grow." During the ceremony, Margaret made a point of visiting every classroom. She talked with the children about the importance of studying and preparing for the future. "Mrs. Margaret, is it true you built a house inside another house?" asked an 8-year-old girl. "Yes, it's true, my dear, because sometimes we need to do things that seem strange to protect our family." "And did everyone think you were crazy?" "A lot of people did, but I knew my husband was very smart and I trusted him." "What would you do if you were our age?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I would study hard, pay attention to the wise adults in the family, and not be afraid to do different things when I knew they were right." The conversation with the children inspired Margaret to create a special project, an education program on family preparedness specifically aimed at children. "James, children understand the importance of preparing better than adults do," she said. "They don't have the prejudices that adults have." "Mother, do you want to create a course on preparedness for children?" "I want to create a program where children teach their families to prepare. They can be multipliers of knowledge." The Little Preparers program was launched when Margaret was 81. Children from 8 to 12 years old learned basic principles of family preparedness and then taught them to their families. "Mother, this program is having extraordinary success," reported James. "The children convince their families better than any adult could." "It's because they speak the language of the heart," replied Margaret. "When a child asks their mother to prepare to protect the family, the mother listens differently." Dr. Patterson, who collaborated with the program even at 85, was impressed by the effectiveness of the approach. "Margaret, you've discovered the secret to multiplying knowledge," he said. "Children are the best ambassadors for preparedness." Michael expanded the program to other countries, adapting the content for different cultures and types of extreme events. "Mrs. Margaret, we have children teaching preparedness for earthquakes in Mexico, for hurricanes in the Caribbean, for droughts in Africa," he reported in a meeting. "Thomas would be moved to know that knowledge is reaching families through children," replied Margaret. Dr. Richard, who had specialized in educational sustainability projects, offered resources to expand the program even further. "Mrs. Margaret, we estimate that each child in the program influences at least 4 adults," he said. "It's the most effective form of multiplication we've ever seen." "It's because children aren't ashamed to admit they're afraid and want protection," observed Margaret. "Adults sometimes have too much pride to prepare properly." At 83, Margaret began to slow down her activities. She definitively passed the presidency of the foundation to James and dedicated herself to smaller projects, closer to home. "Mother, you've built something extraordinary," said James in a conversation. The foundation runs on its own now. It has a life of its own. That's how it had to be, son. Good ideas have to grow and become independent of those who created them. And what do you intend to do now? I want to write letters to my grandchildren, telling stories about their grandfather Thomas. And I want to tend to my little garden. After transforming the world, you want to tend to plants? James, tending to plants has always been my way of preparing. A well-tended garden nourishes the body and the soul. Margaret spent her last active years dividing her time between family and small local projects. She helped the Aspen community create a community preparedness system for weather events. Mrs. Dorothy, who had become her best friend over decades, visited her almost every day. "Dear, I'm proud of the extraordinary woman you've become," she said during one of these visits. "Mrs. Dorothy, I only did what any mother would do. I tried to protect my family and ended up learning to help other families too. But not every mother would have had the courage to trust knowledge and act when everyone thought it was wrong. The courage came from love. When we love, we do things we didn't even know we were capable of doing." James visited his mother every weekend, always accompanied by his family. The grandchildren, now teenagers and young adults, loved listening to their grandmother's stories. "Grandma, do you regret anything in your life?" asked the eldest granddaughter, who was studying engineering. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I regret taking so long to understand that your grandfather's knowledge could help other people besides us. If I had started sharing it sooner, perhaps more families would have benefited. But Grandma, you started when it was possible, and you helped so many people." "That's true, dear. Sometimes we can only help others after we learn to help ourselves." Michael continued visiting Margaret regularly, always bringing news about the projects that had developed from her teachings. "Mrs. Margaret, the university wants to create a permanent chair in your name," he told her during a visit. "Not in my name, Michael, in Joachim's name. He was the scientist in the family." "How about the Joachim and Margaret Foster Chair in Community Preparedness?" "That I accept. It shows that theory and practice need to go together. Dr. Patterson, even at a very advanced age, still occasionally collaborated with the Foundation's projects. During one of his last visits to Margaret, he made an observation she would keep forever. "Margaret, do you know the greatest lesson I learned working with you?" he asked. "What is it, Dr. Patterson?" "That real science is science that serves to improve people's lives. Everything else is just an intellectual exercise. Joachim always said that. That knowledge that doesn't help anyone is useless. You two transformed knowledge into life. That's what every scientist should do." At 85, Margaret had the joy of seeing her first great-grandson born. James brought the baby for her to meet just days after the birth. "Mother, this is Joachim, your great-grandson," said James, placing the baby in her arms. "Joachim," repeated Margaret, moved. "He will carry his great-grandfather's name with pride, and he will grow up hearing stories about how his great-grandparents saved so many families. James, I want him to learn that knowledge is responsibility. When we know how to help, we have an obligation to help." Dr. Richard Henderson, who had become a dear friend of the family, organized one final tribute for Margaret, a documentary about her life and work. "Mrs. Margaret, this documentary will tell your story to future generations," he said during the filming. "Tell the true story, Dr. Henderson, that it was fear that motivated me, love that gave me courage, and knowledge that showed me the way. It's an inspiring story. It shows that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. I did nothing extraordinary. I just trusted my husband and had the courage to act. Anyone can do that." The documentary was released when Margaret was 86. It was shown in schools and universities around the world, inspiring a new generation of people to properly prepare for life's challenges. Mrs. Dorothy watched the documentary with Margaret at a special screening in Aspen. "My dear, it was moving to see our story told like that," she said after the screening. "Our story, Mrs. Dorothy?" "Of course. I was there from the beginning. I saw you build that strange protection. I saw people doubt. I saw the cold arrive, and I saw how you turned all of that into help for the whole world. You were always an important witness, Mrs. Dorothy. Your doubts helped me understand that I needed to better explain what I was doing. In her later years, Margaret dedicated herself mainly to her family. She loved tending the garden, preparing lunches for her grandchildren, and telling stories about Joachim to her great-grandson. James took over the complete management of the foundation, which now operated in more than 50 countries. The programs developed by Margaret had become official public policy in several places. "Mum, you started a movement that will keep growing long after we're gone," he said in a conversation. "I didn't start anything, son. I just planted a seed I found in your father's notes. You all were the ones who nurtured it so it could grow. But without your initial courage, none of this would exist." James, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you are afraid. Michael, who had become a social entrepreneur of international renown, always credited his success to Margaret's teachings. "Mrs. Margaret taught me that true success is when our work keeps helping people even when we're no longer here," he would say in interviews. Dr. Patterson passed away at 92, leaving behind an impressive scientific legacy. Margaret was very saddened by her friend's passing. "He was essential to scientifically validate everything we did," she said to James. "Without him, people might never have taken our work seriously." Dr. Patterson always said you were the most important teacher he ever had. And he was the most dedicated student. We learned so much from each other. At 88, Margaret began to show signs of growing frail. She started receiving special care at home, always surrounded by family. James moved closer to his mother to oversee her care. The grandchildren took turns keeping their grandmother company. "Grandma, do you have any regrets in life?" asked the eldest grandson during one of these visits. "My only regret is not having had more time with your grandfather, Thomas," Margaret replied. "But I'm grateful for all the time we did have together." "Do you think he would be proud of everything that's happened?" "I'm sure he would. Thomas always dreamed of seeing his knowledge help many people, and that's exactly what happened." Michael visited Margaret one last time, bringing news about the international expansion of the projects. "Mrs. Margaret, we now have community preparedness programs running in 70 countries, he reported. 70 countries, Margaret repeated, impressed. Thomas never imagined his notes would reach so far. You turned his notes into action, and action multiplies. Michael, promise me one thing. Anything, Mrs. Margaret. Promise that you will never stop learning. Preparedness is a continuous process. There's always something new to discover. I promise, Mrs. Margaret. Dr. Richard made a point of visiting her regularly in her final months, always thanking her for the lessons he had learned. Mrs. Margaret, you taught me that true success is when our work serves people, not when people serve our work, he said during one of these visits. Dr. Richard, we all make mistakes in the beginning. What's important is that we manage to fix things and work together afterward. You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Everyone deserves a second chance when they're willing to learn and improve. Mrs. Dorothy, despite her very advanced age, insisted on visiting her friend. During one of her last visits, the two talked about the entire journey they had lived through together. My dear, do you remember when I thought you were losing your mind because of that construction? Said Mrs. Dorothy. Yes, I remember, replied Margaret, smiling. And I thank you for continuing to be my friend even though you thought that. It's because I knew you were a good person, even when I didn't understand what you were doing. That's what true friendship is, Mrs. Dorothy. It's trusting the person even when we don't understand their choices. James spent the last months by his mother's side, running the foundation from home and ensuring she had every comfort she needed. Mum, would you like me to read Dad's notes to you? He offered one afternoon. Yes, I would, son. I like hearing his words. James read Thomas's meteorological notes, which had been the starting point for everything. Margaret listened attentively, as if she were discovering that information for the first time. James, your father truly was a genius, she commented. He could see things that others couldn't, and you had the courage to trust what he saw. When we truly love someone, trusting becomes easy. On a fall morning, exactly 40 years after the start of that strange construction that had changed so many lives, Margaret woke up weaker than usual. James, she called softly. I'm here, Mother. I want you all to know that I died happy. We managed to turn fear into protection, and protection into help for many people. Mother, you changed the world. No, son. I just did what any mother would do. I tried to protect my family, and I discovered that protecting our family means protecting all families. James held his mother's hand as she spoke her last words. Take care of your father's notes, and always remember, knowledge only serves when it turns into action, and action only has value when it helps someone. Margaret Foster passed away peacefully that morning at the age of 89, surrounded by family and the certainty that she had fulfilled her mission. The funeral was one of the largest ever seen in the region. People from dozens of countries came to pay their last respects to the woman who had transformed fear into protection and protection into hope for millions of families. James, emotional but strong, gave the main speech. My mother always said she wasn't a special person. She was just a widow who wanted to protect herself from the cold. But she taught us that we don't need to be special to do extraordinary things. We just need to have the courage to trust knowledge and act when necessary. Michael spoke on behalf of all the professionals who had worked with Margaret over the years. Mrs. Margaret taught us that preparation is an act of love. We prepare not out of fear, but out of love for the people we want to protect. This teaching will continue saving lives for generations. Dr. Richard Henderson, visibly moved, thanked her for the second chance Margaret had given him. Mrs. Margaret taught me that it's never too late to start over by doing the right things. She transformed my failure into an opportunity for learning and growth. The foundation continued to grow after Margaret's departure. James maintained the principles she established: accessible knowledge, community preparation, and a focus on the most vulnerable families. 5 years after Margaret's death, the foundation was operating in over 100 countries. The Thomas Foster Institute had trained thousands of professionals specialized in preparation for extreme events. The great-grandson Thomas, now 6 years old, loved hearing stories about his great-grandmother. James would always tell how she had turned great-grandfather Thomas's notes into action that saved many lives. "Grandpa James, why did Grandma Margaret build that strange house?" the boy would ask. "Because she loved great-grandfather Thomas very much and trusted his knowledge, and because she wasn't afraid to do different things when she knew they were right." And why did people think it was strange? Because sometimes we do things that other people don't understand at first, but when we do it out of love and with knowledge, in the end, it always works out. Mrs. Dorothy lived to be 95. In her final weeks of life, she always talked about the friend who had become famous worldwide. Margaret was special from the start, she would say to anyone who would listen. I just didn't know how she was special. I thought she was losing her mind, but in truth she was finding her way. Michael created a social enterprise that bore Margaret's name, Margaret Foster Solutions for Community Preparedness. The company developed low-cost technologies that allowed poor families to adequately prepare for extreme events. Mrs. Margaret always said that preparedness cannot be a privilege of the rich, he explained in interviews. Our company exists to make preparedness accessible to everyone. Dr. Richard Henderson dedicated himself entirely to social projects in the final years of his career. He created an investment fund focused exclusively on companies that developed solutions to protect vulnerable communities. I learned from Mrs. Margaret that money only has value when it serves to protect people, he would say. Now I use my resources to multiply the impact of the work she began. 10 years after Margaret's death, James organized an international symposium to evaluate the global impact of the work started by his mother. The numbers were impressive. More than 10 million families had been directly benefited by the community preparedness programs. Hundreds of thousands of professionals had been trained in the principles developed by Margaret, and most importantly, the mortality and damage rate in extreme weather events had decreased significantly in the regions where the programs operated. My mother started by building protection around our house, said James in his opening speech at the symposium. Today, you have built a protection network around the world. She would be proud to see how a simple idea can grow and touch so many lives. During the symposium, the creation of the Margaret Foster Community Preparedness Award was announced, which would be granted annually to individuals or organizations that developed innovative solutions for the protection of vulnerable communities. The first award was given to a young engineer from Bangladesh who had developed low-cost floating houses for communities affected by regular floods. This award represents the values that Mrs. Margaret taught, to use knowledge to serve people, especially the most vulnerable, said the winner in her acceptance speech. Michael, who at 60 had become a world reference in climate-adapted construction, always ended his lectures with a quote from Margaret. As Mrs. Margaret used to say, preparedness is not fear, it is love. We prepare because we love our family and our community. And true love always finds a way to protect. The Thomas Foster Institute continued to grow, creating campuses on different continents. The curriculum always included a mandatory course on fundamentals of community preparedness, based on Margaret's teachings. The teachers always told new students the story of the simple woman who had trusted her husband's notes and transformed theoretical knowledge into practical solutions that saved millions of lives. 20 years after Margaret's death, James was preparing to retire and pass the leadership of the foundation to the next generation. His eldest daughter, who had studied at the Thomas Foster Institute, was preparing to assume the presidency. "Dad, do you think Grandma would be proud of what we've built?" she asked during a conversation about the transition. "Your grandmother would be even prouder to know that you continue to learn and innovate," replied James. "She always said that what mattered was not what we had already done, but what we could still do to help more people." The great-grandson Thomas, now a 21-year-old young man studying meteorology at university, often visited the site of the family's original property in Highland Ridge. The land had been transformed into a public memorial, with a replica of Margaret's original construction and a small museum telling the story of the Foster family. "Great-grandfather Thomas and great-grandmother Margaret, thank you for teaching me that knowledge is responsibility," he would say whenever he visited the memorial. A plaque at the entrance to the memorial summarized the main lesson left by Margaret. No one understood why she built a barn around the house until the cold arrived. But when the cold arrived, everyone understood that preparation is love, knowledge is power, and courage is doing the right thing even when others don't understand. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of preparation and overcoming adversity. Do you believe Margaret made the right decisions? Leave your opinion in the comments and share with us where you are watching from. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.